Welcome to Mandibil. This is part 3 of my deconstruction of Stefan Molyneux's video called How to Go Insane, where he sort of lectures his minions about how to understand UPB. And he, if you remember from my part 1, he immediately goes into saying, now everything will be solved for you. It will be crystal clear. This is just listen a few minutes here. Everything will be so clear. You won't ask any questions anymore, right? You might just want to think that it's almost 15 years ago since he wrote the book called Universally Preferable Behaviour, which is also known as UPB. And now all of a sudden he can crack it, in a video here. Everything will be solved, right? It's sort of, come on, man. Do you really believe that? Do you think that people are going to fall for this bullshit, right? It's like, they have been asking questions more or less. People have been confused. Some have criticized. Some have done this, done that. I have made a complete deconstruction of the proof, as he calls it, of his framework for ethics. And but according to himself, nobody has challenged it. It stands there like a pristine proof of ethics, right? But there's apparently somebody on the board or in the community who has asked a few questions. Now he's going to illuminate everybody, so nothing is unclear, right? No, it has taken 14-15 years to get to the point where he, in a video in a couple of hours, can makes everything so clear that nobody needs to ask any questions. The point is just that in the last two parts I have he basically used this young man, apparently some guy, who has sort of ventured into trying to make a little criticism, and now he's supposed to have a debate with him on his sort of the what would you call it, on the inside, in the forum, not sort of live streaming, but they record these debates on his private stuff like Discord or something, and then it might eventually end up being published like a video here on Odysee, or maybe it's BitChute. I'm not even sure where I got it from. I think it was from BitChute, but I'm not sure. No, I think actually Odysee, that's where you can download from directly. But he just rails against this guy, right? He didn't end up in this debate. He just, as far as I understood, got the sort of headlines from the guy that this is, if you discussed in the forum back and forth before they finally agreed on a debate, he might have talked about this and talked about that, but in headlines rather than deep cut philosophy, right? But because this guy didn't turn up for the debate, Stefan Molyneux rails against him using only these headlines he has apparently stated somewhere, and he goes to tell that you can't philosophize this way, and he has been spending more than half an hour now telling everybody how stupid this guy is, how mentally ill he basically is, and how everybody who tries to argue this way, they are sort of mentally ill. They have to go for a direct quote in his book and so on. Maybe something like what rationality rules did, and then he just, said to the rationality rules, well, it's boring, right? So, in effect, nobody can actually argue against him. So he's sitting up there alone, and nobody can argue because basically they prove he's right? And but this is an unnecessary long use of some guy's half-baked, unfinished arguments for a debate that he's trying to sort of, in my opinion, he's trying to scare the rest of his minions into submission, using this guy as the stepstone to get there, right? By pretending it's a full debate and a full argument, by he's pretending it's a full argument and then attacking that strawman wise, so people think that he is actually referring to somebody arguing, right? And then classifying all kinds of arguments that are not particularly specifically precisely perfect according to his standard as useless and stupid, and people are out to attack you, out to manipulate you, they are out to undermine your sense of reality and all that, right? So he's going to, on this hyperbolic personal attack on this guy, calling him all sorts of, he's breathing from his mammal hole, and he's an argument from stupidity and ignorance, and it's completely crazy, right? And one of my listeners, Eincrow, who has been checking in a lot of times recently, pointed out that this would, in any reasonable classification, is what is known as a narcissistic rage, right? And I can certainly see where he's going with that argument, Eincrow, right? Because it's unnecessary. Narcissistic rage is narcissists depend on using other people for their ends, right? They need to control and dominate and sort of have mental control, and they also have a very huge and megalomaniac bloated image of themselves, right, as being superior and great and fantastic, and everything is perfect in their little world, right? Just like Stefan Molyneux, his family is perfect, his books are perfect, his philosophy show is the greatest on earth, his wife is the greatest woman on earth, and everything is just so freaking perfect in this guy's life, right? And but then when somebody challenges that, right, their inflated ego, they try to puncture that, right? They go on a what they call a narcissistic rage, which is sort of an all-out mental verbal assault on somebody to just shut them the fuck up and also frighten the rest of his narcissistic supply, which is what you call the rest of the cult, so to say, right? Into understanding that this is what is going to happen with you if you do not behave according to his standards, right? So, hang on a sec. So, absolutely. I mean, it's unnecessarily harsh, and he's using him for his own ends without giving the guy the ability to defend his arguments, right? I agree, this is a kind of a narcissistic rage, right? So, let's end it. As far as I understood, I got to 36:41 last time, and we will just keep going from there. Let me see if I can start it off. That wasn't necessarily a good idea to change the size. Let me see. I'm still working to get used to this software here. Let me see. Yeah, I think we got it pretty well, right? Let's head on.
It's been wounded by nonsense. It's been wounded by sophistry. It's been wounded by contradiction. It's been wounded by manipulation. And you're not helping him? You know, if somebody gets leprosy, they can lose nerve endings, right? Stephen R. Donaldson taught me about this in the Covenant series, right? So they can't tell if they're wounded. They have to do a VSE, visual search of extremities, right? They can't tell that they have a cut or a wound or a blister or a sunburn, or they can't feel. So they got to be constantly checking their feet, and they're like, you know, when you go into the woods, you got to come back and there's ticks and all that. So help him to understand that he's not thinking, he's just short-circuiting. Not this guy.
What he's appealing to here is a sophist, narcissistic trick to make you feel that you can be a part of this cult by working for him, right? Help him. He's lost. The little sheep is lost in the woods, right? Help him understand that he's a full of shit, right? It's sort of a manipulative way of making it sound like they're trying to help this guy. They're not trying. He's not trying to help him. He's trying to fucking get rid of him, right? And by pretending that it's an act of kindness and love, it's actually more an act of, would you please help me get rid of this stupid idiot who's challenging my perfect world, right? And you, my little narcissistic supply, and, you know, attack monkeys, what are they called? Flying monkeys, I think, when they go in and defend their narcissist, right? Because they are surviving in this environment by doing the biddings of the narcissist. And they're not necessarily a narcissistic supplier. That would be the more emotionally adept people and empathetic and so on. They will be controlled. They're the ones being controlled and makes him feel he is superior. But the attack monkeys are those he uses, who has a more aggressive, sadistic, maybe even approach to things, right? To go and attack that guy by saying, well, you're wrong, there's something wrong with you, right? He's claiming it's out of love, just like a religion, right? All religions appeal to love because it's such a fluffy, and if you can control the narrative of love, then you own people, right? Because nobody will, well, are you against love, right? So it's highly manipulative, this, right? It's so sophist and narcissistic in nature.
Ridiculous people as a whole. When they make a bunch of nonsense claims, you got to help them out of love. If you were hiking in the woods, you came across someone who was trapped under a heavy log, wouldn't you stop and lift it? Of course you would. Of course you would.
Not if it was Adolf Hitler, I wouldn't. Or Stalin, or Pol Pot, or, Mussolini, or, Boris Johnson, or I wouldn't. So it's circumstantial.
See somebody fundamentally confused.
Or if it was the guy or the girl, a woman who just tried to kill my children, right? And a log falls on him. No, I don't think I'm going to help, right? It's not my problem there's a log on that person, right? I'm not going to sacrifice potentially my own life to save somebody else.
And unable to think clearly, unable to define anything, unable to make a coherent statement.
As I pointed out in the earlier parts, he is strawmanning him, right? He's making a strawman argument in his absence and claiming this is what he's trying to argue, and then he's trying to pull that down, right? This is it's strawman 101, this, right? So if you don't recognize this, you are susceptible to being manipulated into thinking that you are helping out and helping the world understand things better by working for Stefan Molyneux, right?
Help them. I mean, obviously helping them is...
So you don't need help, right? Help them, right? You never say, help me understand philosophy. No. Everything is clear from your standpoint, right? Deconstructing your book tells a very different story, right? But you have the idea that, of course, you know everything. You're perfect, right? Your book on ethics hasn't changed. The official book hasn't changed any revision. It hasn't been revised for 14 years. So apparently every single freaking word in that book must be perfect. Even if you have been philosophizing for the last 14 years. Apparently there's not even a single word that needs to be changed, right? So you must be great. So if there's something wrong, it's somebody else who needs to be changed, right? They need help, and you need to guide your little peons into helping you attacking this guy, because that shuts them up, not criticizing your perfect philosophy. Perfect quote, right? That's what it's all about. You're being manipulated as an audience here, right?
It's helping you. We all benefit when the world thinks more clearly. Helping.
Okay, so this guy is sort of a placeholder for the rest of the world, right? So my little apostles, go out in the world and present my great philosophy, because it must be perfect, because I'm Mr. Philosophy and Mr. Rationality and Mr. Empiricism and Mr. Truth and all that, right?
Them is helping you. Don't let people persist in error. It's bad for them. It hurts them.
Oh, the sophisties. It's steaming from the windows, right?
They hurt others. When he tries this kind of foggy, nonsense, tentacle-brained sophist attack, this is the log he's trapped under. It's bullshit. And there's a part of him, it may not be a very obvious part of him, but I guarantee you it's there. There's a part of him, my friends, that is begging for you to lift the log of bullshit off his legs. Help me think. Help me be clear.
There's a part of him, he doesn't know it. But deep down inside, there's a little minion saying, help me, help me. Holy crap. Oh.
Help me understand that I don't understand. Help me stop using words that I don't understand. Help
Just
me stop
like Stefan
intimidating
Molyneux
people
himself
with an
does.
appeal to insecurity. Help me stop being a bully that frightens people with my use of words.
What he's basically saying, help me keep my stupid business model going, right? Yes, people can be invited, and if they pay, a donation, they can have free entry into my Discord. But those who are critical, they need to be exhumed, excommunicated, right? Excommunicated, that's possibly the right word, right? When we are talking about a cult or cultish behavior. So he's basically telling his congregation, there are bad people among us. They need to be, excommunicated. We don't need these bad. They have their demon spawn. They have a little demon inside them, or they are a demon, but they have a little angel inside them trying to tell them that they should change. But they need you to help them understand. They need to change into following my philosophy, my religion. Oh my God.
I don't have a clue about. Help me out of the fog. Help me into the world. Help me into reality. Help me into truth. Help me stop being addicted to this garbage I push. Now,
so he thinks that he tells people that this guy doesn't even know what he's doing, right? It's like hearing a Christian priest talking, right? The little lamb has got lost. They don't know what they're doing, right? They don't know what they're doing, but we know what's right, and we are going to tell them how they should behave because we have the great insight into the eternity of truth and right? Holy crap, man, right?
Of course, you call people out. Well, look, so because he's doing an appeal to insecurity, he's fundamentally insecure. So when people attack you, they're telling you their greatest fear. This is Troll 101, right? I'm not calling this guy troll, but this is just in general, it's troll.
So you're basically saying that anybody who's trying to argue with you, appealing to, epistemology or moral reality or moral realism, or any kind of say, okay, this is sort of the ball game I'm into, sort of, I would argue in sort of this way. And then it's just an attack. You wrote the great book on argument called The Art of the Argument. But apparently, when everybody tries to come and argue with you, you present it as an attack. Mr. Argument. You can't even lower your sort of narcissism into, okay, maybe they actually might have something. And the only thing I can do, the conclusion I can draw is, well, your little fellow inside tells you, well, you don't know what you're talking about. But your bloated self, right, is saying, I know everything, right? But because there's this little guy inside, you're saying, well, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I'm just a narcissist. You have to fight that inner demon, so to say, by destroying any kind of argument as being an attack, right? You're presenting yourself as this guy. You're actually attacking yourself, basically, right? You're talking to yourself, telling yourself, I'm still perfect, right? Don't let this inner skepticism or doubt get a hold in me. So I'm attacking myself. I'm repeating to myself, you're fine, you're great, you're perfect, your philosophy. And if there's something wrong, it must be some external thing. And this is possibly this guy who has a bad psychology and whatever, right? And this is like, a psychologist could go crazy on this, right?
101, right? When people attack you, they're telling you their worst fear, right? So...
And you're attacking this guy. I mean, how else could you put it, right? He doesn't even get, you're attacking him, you're sticking fucking needles in him and swords in him, and he's not even allowed to defend himself, right? So you are pathetic, you're a loser. You're attacking someone who you don't give the opportunity to defend himself. That is a fucking dick move, right? I mean, I hope this guy comes back and give you what you deserve, right? Apart from me pointing it out here, right?
You know, if you're a torturer, to use an extreme example, if you're a torturer and you're a guy, you're gonna punch a guy in the nuts. Why? Because you know, as a guy, that's what hurts you the most. And so when you punch a guy in the nuts as a torturer, you're saying that your worst fear is to be punched in the nuts. So whatever people try to inflict upon you in your life or online, whatever people try to inflict upon you, they reveal as their own worst fear. So when he attempts to...
So why don't you point at yourself? What are you doing here, right? It's like you feel that you are exempt from these psychological rules, or, you know, these having an inner that's fighting to get out because of the false self or whatever it is. But you're not suffering from that. You're just sort of a perfect, neutral, objective philosopher who, when you present something, it's just that's the way it is, and there's no way to, you know, reason to doubt it or be skeptical or anything like that. You're sort of, it's like you want to present yourself as some superhuman of some kind, who's just come down from your, you know, electrified jello and tell people this is how it is. Like Moses and the 15 commandments. Oh, by the way, 10 commandments. There was one tablet he lost and it cracked, right? Mel Brooks. The 15 commandments. The 10 commandments. Where I was going with this, yeah, it's like he has to be this, present himself as some kind of superhuman who can change the world and point out, there's a bad one over there, go help him. There's a bad girl over there, go help her. There's a bad over there because it doesn't fit to my, you know, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Appeal to your insecurity by saying, well, UPB is just fundamentally wrong. And
So you're insecure about your philosophy. If this guy can say the words epistemology and PPB and whatever it was, and, you know, more realism, and you're triggered to, you know, rail against him without him being able to defend himself online, it's ridiculous, right? Why don't you grab your own tits for a change?
What was the phrase again? It lacks PBB, properly basic beliefs. It's like, okay, it's just a bunch of nonsense. You need solid grounding of these things. Okay, what's your solid grounding? Can you define anything? What is reality? What is truth?
Yeah, but I'm at the same time as I'm doing this series, I'm also doing another series where I'm debunking his book Essential Philosophy, and there's basically no rigid definition of anything, right? It just brings new terms in. Now we're talking about senses. Okay, what do you mean senses in regard to objectivity, or reality that you mentioned before? Doesn't the senses come before reality? And, you know, it's one pile of junk, right? Pulled together in a sort of a stream of consciousness, pulled onto paper. And here is a sort of, you have to be rigid and, you know, define definitions and state this and, you know, axioms. No, he doesn't even say axiom, right? So he is trying to make these strict rules for how to do philosophy. And when you read his own philosophy, it's so badly argued and violates his own high standards for how to do philosophy. It's kind of ridiculous, right? It's like he's an imposter. He's not a philosopher. He's an imposter. He's trying to sell himself as this great philosophy guy and give me some money. I'm going to save the world, sort of kind of Jesus of philosophy, right?
Me 17 hours in my introduction to philosophy, give or take, to make that case. I've got a book, Essential Philosophy. I make the case against the simulation for free will. There's a very compact version of UPB in there, which is really good.
Oh, it's really good. Oh, so your subjective understanding of your own proof is it's good. It's really good, right? so subjective, which you are railing against when everybody else are subjective as it's not philosophy. And here you are, no, I make an argument in my book and it's very good, so you should go and read it. Holy fuck. What an idiot, man. Oh.
So when people, like, when he says, well, UPB is just wrong and you need, it's basic, there are basic epistemological problems. What he's doing is he's trying to appeal to your insecurity. He's trying to humiliate you into giving up your position. Well, surely you wouldn't still...
Really? Really? Yeah, it might be the case. I mean, it might be the case, right? Why has this guy, wandered into your apparent forum? It's just, I'm going to fucking get him, right? And all it might be is actually interested in philosophy. And then he has studied philosophy on the internet or seen some other videos and actually been studied philosophy academically or something like that. I'm not saying that's the way to do it. I'm not pro-academic philosophy. In fact, I'm against it, I would say, right? But if anything, but maybe he has sort of, well, what about this moral realism? And compared to UPB, moral realism, can you observe, when Stefan Molyneux calls it objective, does it mean and you can observe it empirically that it's wrong? Because this is one of the big questions that have been, people have been thinking of this conundrum since Hume, actually, right? At least since Hume, right? 300 years. They have been, this is-ought gap, they have been, and you're just hand-waving it away. Say, an ought cannot, you can't say ought not have an ought not, therefore it's an ought because minus times minus makes plus, or something like stupid hand-waving argument like that, right? Violating the complete understanding of what Hume was saying, but also it's turned into metaphysics, right? And you're there talking about more realism and, non-cognitive or cognitive ethics or so on, or morality. But no, we don't want to take the guy seriously and ask, like, tell me more, show love, right? Tell me more. Olivia Newton-John. I'm old school. He's kind of he strawmans him in. This is what he's talking about, and you should be aware, right? And he's actually he's taking the opportunity to rail against somebody who can't defend himself, right? This is a surefire notion of a narcissist. Of course, he's railing against somebody who can't defend them because then he controls the narrative completely, right? He's not allowed to defend himself, the poor guy, right? And this narcissist can then rail as much as he wants and, manipulate his congregation into attacking anybody who's trying to, argue and does not exactly this very minuscule opening for getting into argue against Stefan Molyneux. Then they're out to get you. They're out to attack you, right? It's paranoia. It's completely ridiculous.
Advocate for such a completely discredited nonsense such as UPB. Surely you can see the clear and basic bad think problems in UPB. Surely you couldn't possibly hold this position when no credible philosopher has ever examined it.
I wonder if he has actually looked through my deconstruction of UPB and my other deconstructions of his books and videos and so on, right? He might have. I've tried to show, put a pointer to him that I've done this, right? He might say, well, you only have 180 viewers on YouTube, so you can't possibly be a good philosopher because I used to have 900,000 when I was on YouTube, right? Now I have 0, of course, then I have, 180 more viewers on YouTube than he does. But if I've written a book on ethics, right? Or maybe a treatise like Hume did, right? From, all the way from the foundation all the way up to some kind of moral statement of some kind, right? Moral some understanding of what we're talking about in morality. I would say it should be a moral principle, but that's my way of doing it, right? If I've written a book along those lines and somebody deconstructed it, I would be like, yay, man, somebody's actually taking sentence by sentence by sentence. Maybe some of it is, on the fly bullshit and misunderstandings. Okay, fine, but that's, give and take, right? I would be like, yes, man. Anybody else want to do it? Please, somebody else do it also, right? Because I would have so much input into the next revision of the book, because it cannot possibly be perfect the first time. It can't be. It's a megalomaniac idea that you can write a book, and in the first try of that book that nobody else has been successful in making or writing in all of human history is perfect in the first go, right? Like he presents himself as having done with UPB. He should be fucking grateful somebody is deconstructing his shit, right? And pointing out all the errors. He gets it for free. But how he says it, no, it's an attack on my perfectionism, right? I'm so great, so it can only be an attack because I'm certain and all that, right? So it just goes to show what kind of person he is. What his agenda is. If you maybe you can't even call it an agenda. It's his so faulty psychology that turns out that in between the lines you can read this, right? That's what I'm trying to do when I'm deconstructing it. Also read between the lines, see, but this must mean this and this, connecting the dots this way, right? So he should be thankful. But what he is interested in is saying to himself, I must be perfect because I've told everybody how perfect I am, and this I've, told the world about UPB for the last 14 years, and they have just been unable to find any flaws in it, right? Which is not actually correct. But he needs that to be the case because he's not going back and revising his UPB because he will eventually find out it doesn't work, right? So he has to pretend that it works, basically to further his own agenda, right? Which is keeping his business model going for the rest of his life, right? Even if he stopped now, he possibly would have so much money or cryptos and so on that he could possibly just sit on his sofa the rest of his days and still survive, right? But that would be boring. So he needs to keep going to keep a straight face to these mediocre books, to be, to put it nicely, right? Okay.
And found it to be even remotely valid. Surely you wouldn't reveal your massive ignorance of basic epistemology and metaphysics. Right, so he's attempting to appeal to your insecurity. So what he's revealing is that his greatest fear is humiliation. Right, his greatest fear is humiliation. I'm trying to help him over that fear, right? Because I guess what you could say, like what I'm saying, could be counted as humiliating, but I'm being blunt, and I do it out of love. I do.
Okay, this is sort of a Jesus mentality, right? No. Yeah, but he doesn't know what he's doing, right? The little people, they don't know what they're doing. I'm so fantastic. Jesus was also a fucking narcissist, right? Believing that you're the fucking son of a god. I mean, how crazy, right? Do you need any more arguments for that Jesus was a crazy idiot, right? Something wrong with his head, right? And for some reason, it's always those crazy people that influence people most, right? Because they tell these fantastic stories that people are going to, just like, I talked about in a recent, another part in my another deconstruction of essential philosophy, that people are storytellers because that gives them sort of an extended insight into a reality that they haven't experienced. And you can go listen to my part, I think it's part 10. Oh, is it part 11? I think it was part 10, the recent one where I mentioned that. But it's like people they want to read fiction books. They want to see fiction movies. They want to hear stories about fairy tales and adventure. They don't want to When you listen to history, it's also these big guys who had great visions of, the Persian Empire, or the great, Greek, the temples, and all this megalomania. It's not the pottery maker down on the street. They're just sort of the riffraff of boring people. That's not history, right? But that's what I find to be interesting. Not those crazy people destroying empires and creating and destroying empires, right? All through history, right? But that's the story people want to hear. They want to hear the story in the colored magazine about the royalty, or they wore this ball, this nice dresses, but they don't want to hear about the guy next door who's who lost his dog and is sad. Who gives a crap? No, we want to read about the dresses of the royalty, right? So people want stories rather than they want to philosophize about reality, right? And that's why philosophy has always had a hard time reaching a general audience. And this kind of attempt at sort of mixing politics and stories and dream analysis and all sorts of things you have done, right, into that becoming a kind of philosophy is sort of violating the whole idea of philosophy, in my opinion. So
do it out of love. This guy's a smart guy, man. We could turn this tide. We could get him over to the light. We could get him to stop all of this manipulative, old womanly dowager's hump bullshit. We could get him to do some real good in his life.
Well, why don't you ask him to try to make a decent argument, Mr. Art of the Argument, right? Why don't you tell him how to argue? Why are you pushing your acolytes to attack him, right? Or help him understand he's on the wrong path, right? Why don't you tell him how to argue? Invite him in and say, no, the way you argue there, you're not, being objective or whatever term you would use, right? You should argue this way. What are you trying to say? I think what you're trying to say, this is how you would argue. Then you would enlighten your people on your great ideas about arguing. But no, that's not what you're attempting, right? You're telling your little minions to go and attack him and get rid of him, basically, right? So your cult is pristine, and you have this protective layer of attack monkeys who's going to anybody trying to argue, which you will always frame it as some bad kind of argument. Nobody has had any success in trying to enlighten on you the bullshit you call ethics, right? It's so unbelievably bad argued. It's almost like I can't believe it, right? When you read the book and deconstruct it, as I have done, and then look down in the text below to find a link to my deconstruction on UPB, you are not being a good philosopher. No, you're being a sophist and telling your fans to go attack anybody who tries to conjure up some kind of debate that could be, rigidly philosophical, right?
He's a smart guy, great use of language, and he's manipulative, which is fine, and there's nothing wrong with that if it's used in the right purpose, right?
Oh, in the right purpose. Oh, I'm waiting to hear him explain what a right purpose could be, right? No, manipulation is fine, as long as you do it the way I think you should do it. I mean, he's a professional sophist, so he have possibly an idea, right? He thinks it's okay, basically, to manipulate whenever you need to, because this is an example of 2 hours or 1.5 hours, whatever, of manipulation, right? 2 hours possibly, right? 2 hours and then some. This is, come on, man.
In a sense, like you can get your, I was told to brush my teeth when I was a kid because I was told that fairies danced on sugar bits and would crack my enamel. All right. That's just the noble lie stuff, which I'm not sort of advocating for, but the fact that he is manipulative is not the end of the world. Just, try and use it for good, or at least use it against bad people.
How do you know what a bad person is? Right? What's a bad people? What's that? Right? Is it you? You are the one pointing that there's a bad people over there, and there's a bad people. Go attack. Right? Go manipulate, right? It's okay, you manipulate as long as you do it like this guy I'm attacking now. You can manipulate all you want, right? manipulation is good if you have the right agenda. You have the right, the noble lie, whatever you want to call it, right? It's basically appealing to sophistry, right? It's out in the open now. I mean, you're absolutely ignorant if you can't see this guy as a sophist. He's not a philosopher, right? He's suffering from narcissism and megalomania and all sorts of problems. He's just very good with words, right? He's very good with words. And he can sort of cover it all up and seem like he's out to save the world, of course.
So the problem is, though, when you push back and you correctly identify this verbiage as just total empty-headed bullshit, he's going to feel very humiliated because that's his worst fear, right? But if you can handle his worst fear, if you can handle your worst fear, you become a superpower. The superpower is, what's your worst fear, right? What's your worst fear? What's your worst fear? And if you can face that down, you gain a superpower.
Well, I'm no longer fearing that that people of the world would take UPB seriously, because first of all, they won't fucking understand what is writing. And if they get to some understanding what is writing, they will figure out that it doesn't hang together, right? So they would, and even if they tried to use it, it would be so cumbersome that they wouldn't get anywhere, right? They would sort of, I can't do this, man. It's like bicycling with 200 kilos on rocks on your back seat, right? It's like, oh man, get it out of my face, right?
When I was a kid, bad reputation was the worst thing, right? Did I have to face that down over the last 50 years? Sure did. Now I can't be harmed by it, and people don't have anything to use against me. So when you push back, so here's the problem.
But use against you? What kind of freaky idea is that? Are you thinking that people are out to get you? Come on, yeah, there might be some, but there might actually also be someone who wants to go the philosophical route, right? You are claiming to do a philosophy show, by the way, right? But it's like, well, if you can classify everybody who tries to argue with you as an attack and tell people to go help you get rid of them, well, then you are sort of sitting in your perfect ivory tower of philosophy, right? While not actually being philosophy, but if you can remove all challenges, it feels like you are ruling the world, right? Just like Adolf Hitler or Stalin or whoever they want. They want to get rid of all those wrong thinkers, right? Why would we have those useless eaters, right? Get rid of them, right? They have wrong think, so get rid of them, right? Because then sort of, you can, ostracize, but you could also kill them in the end if they don't comply, right? Just a dangerous path, this.
And this is why you guys don't push back on this, right? You're certainly skilled and smart enough too, right?
Appeal to people's vanity, right? Oh, that's a sophist trick. That's on page 2 in the book, right? Appeal to people's vanity, make them feel like, oh, you're so great. You're so great. Give me money. You're so great. You're so great. Oh, by the way, donations, right? Oh, you're so great. Oh, I love you, right? Are you arguing against me? Get out of here, right? Arguing against me? Not good. Appealing to your vanity, I'm going to lick you in the ass and make you feel good, right?
But the reason you don't is you sense deep down that if you start asking him...
I don't like people telling me what I think or what I don't think, right? He's manipulating your brain into, oh, this is what you think, right? And then let me look into your brain and tell you what you're thinking. There's a good one over there. There's a bad one in your thoughts over there. This is good. This is bad. This is right think. This is wrong think. And this is what you're doing. This is what you're thinking. And you're a good little person. I love you. Give me money.
To define his terms, right? And I did this, right? And I said, your failure to understand something is not disproof of it, right? So... if he says, there are basic epistemological problems, you say, could you please list the basic epistemological problems with reference to the text, right? That's a polite and reasonable. If somebody makes a claim, it's perfectly reasonable to ask them to substantiate that claim. In fact, it's not only perfectly reasonable, it's kind of essential, right?
He has mentioned several times that he underwent some therapy like 20 years ago or something like that. You may correct me if not, but that's the notion I have. I would have loved to be like, people who live off of psychologizing other people. They don't want to do it in 2 hours, right? And say, well, fine, you got 2 hours now. They want it to be 100 hours or 200 hours or more, right? So, and in the end, they want the patient to feel good and feel they got something, right? But if it takes to appeal to the patient's vanity or something like that to make them feel good, I'm convinced that most psychologists would do that, even if they have weird notions or kind of immoral notions or whatever you want, they would sort of say, oh, you're good enough. Oh, you're fine. So let's how much you have developed over these 100 hours. Oh my God, it's so great. You're so great. Go out in the world, right? Now they made money of these 100 or 200 hours of therapy, right? So what did this psychologist end up telling him? Basically telling him, well, you figure out that you should stand your own ground, and this is what you stand for, and then anybody else attacking you or anybody else trying to argue with you, they're out to attack you. So I'm sensing that there might be some sort of, he's referenced it a couple of times where he figured out that he sort of lost in the darkness of manipulative psychologies of people around him in his childhood, and then this therapy helped him get over the hurdle and get to standing for his own values and so on. Well, that's something like that, right? But it's not a therapist who gives it to you. It's your own thinking that reaches that point where you figure out how to stand for yourself, right? It's your own mental capacity. It's not a psychologist. They may help you get there, but they're not giving it to you, right? So it's like having a driver's license. Okay, when you get the driver's license, you are sufficiently, it's a minimal viable product, sort of. You are capable of driving around in the traffic without killing anybody, right? So that's the sort of ground level, but you're not done educating yourself as a car driver. You have to go further, and after a year or two, maybe, then you are sort of sufficiently experienced in driving a car, and the car becomes sort of a part of your body, or you become part of the car, whatever you want to put it, right? That's the same with philosophy. If you're going to a therapist, you're sort of getting pushed out of your habitual thinking. Well, that doesn't mean you have arrived at the perfect understanding, understanding of how to philosophize and get to the right. So if you have been in therapy and thought, oh, I must be perfect because my therapist tells me, well, then you're not getting to that. You're not developing your driver's license to be a very good driver. You're just staying with, I have the license now, so I'm perfect, right? So that's just my analogy.
UPB and metaphysics. UPB is not a metaphysics-facing argument. It's an internal consistency argument. I'll get to that in a sec, right?
Okay, but you can't argue for ethics that way, right? You can't say, I'll make an argument over here, and because it's not consistent, I have proved that there's ethics or something like that. It's the most fucking stupid argument I've ever heard, right? It's not even an argument. It's just manipulation, right? You have to start with metaphysics because that's the foundation for figuring out what to know. And if you're saying you have an objective morality, you have to point out how you know about that objective reality or objective morality, right? So it has to be based on metaphysics, whether you like it or not, right? This is why I urge you to not take this guy seriously, because he does not know what he's talking about, right? Even I, as a sort of middle of the road layman, self-taught philosopher during 10 years, I can see this clearly, right? So you ought to, be as critical as you at least take into consideration that he might not actually know what he's talking about, right? If if you reach an argument where you say, I'm not even sure what the hell is going on here. If you argue against me, I'm right, or something like that. This sounds weird, right? Stay with that notion that it's weird. Because if you have a sense that something is weird, it's possibly weird, right? If I say that's an elephant, why would you then say, that's a weird argument? I don't. No, okay, maybe elephant. But if I say that's a cup of coffee or something like that, there's nothing in it that is possibly weird, right? It's like, yeah, maybe I'm not experiencing a cup of coffee, but still, it makes kind of natural sense to the way my mind works and my understanding of how the world works and so on. But I made an argument that when you argue against it, you prove that argument is right. It doesn't matter. You don't need to know what the argument is. It's just you are arguing against it, right? Something like that. That should have some bells ringing and say, no. There needs to be some foundation here. And what is the foundation? It's actually metaphysics, which he actually pedals away from now because he knows he has no clue what he's talking about. So he needs to go back to, if you argue against me, I'm right. Oh my God. So people criticize him actually has an effect. He's sort of confining himself, right, into a little ball where the only thing he can say is, well, I'm right. I'm right because I'm right. Something like that, right? And that goes to show to me it actually has an effect on his philosophy, or his lack of philosophy, I should say, right?
So if somebody says 2 and 2 make 5, is that a metaphysical statement? No, it's an internal consistency argument. That 2 and 2 make 4 and 5 is not equal to 4. You don't need to know anything about whether they're oranges or apples.
No. But you're talking about your framework for ethics, right? That's only half of the equation. The framework is how you judge moral statements. You need to go to the moral statements because those are the ones pointing or should be pointing to some kind of reality, because that's where things are going on, isn't it? According to your empiricism. So if you say murder is wrong, there have to be some fucking objectivity in reaching that murder part, or that wrongness of that ending of life, right? The wrongness, where the hell is it? And would you believe it? What he says in his book is, I don't need to go around proving that murder is wrong. That's his argument for why murder is wrong, right? I mean, can you believe it, right? Can you believe it? So fucking stupid, man. It's wrong because it's wrong. I don't need to prove it. Everybody knows it. Yes. I don't need to philosophize about that, which people have been, splitting hairs and pulling hairs out of their head for 300 years. No, Stefan Molyneux does not need to do that, right? Because he's perfect.
Or newspapers or whatever it is that's being counted. It's not an empirical argument. 2 and 2 make 5 is not a metaphysical argument. It's not even an epistemological problem. It's because it's self-contradictory, it's false. It's anything which is self-contradictory.
Self-contradictory? It's not contradictory. No, contradictions are only when there are two possibles, right or wrong, right? The case or not the case. Contradiction must be the opposite, but 2 plus 2 equals 5 is not opposite to 2 plus 2 equals 4 or 2 plus 2 equals 7, right? It's either correct according to mathematics or it isn't correct according to mathematics, right? It's not a contradiction.
Which claims to describe something objective, since the objective universe is consistent, right? This is one of Aristotle's 3 laws.
What do you mean that it's consistent? I don't give a shit about Aristotle's 4 laws. I would possibly criticize them from here to eternity, but there's some truth in it, but correctness to it or validity to it, but it's also taking so much for granted, right? It's sort of inductive reasoning of some kind. It's not consistent, right? My milk in my fridge in 2 weeks, it's not the same milk as it is. Do you say it's consistent that it tends to deteriorate this way, But then what is consistent? It's consistent change, or whatever, right? If I freeze it, it will not change, and depends on whether or not there's 5 degrees in my fridge or 4 degrees centigrade, and so on, right? It's all of these kind of, it's stable, everything is perfectly unchanging in my objective reality, which, by the way, I only have an experience of, you should say, right?
Laws of logic, and an object can only be itself or something else. That's why alibis work, because you can't be in 2 places at the same time. So when he says, well, it's epistemological problems and metaphysical problems, it's like, well, no, that might be relevant to my Introduction to Philosophy series or the work that I've done in Essential Philosophy, the free book you can get at essentialphilosophy.com. But he's just saying these big-sounding philosophical words and that they're basic. Well, ask him.
But why don't you tell us how he should have argued, right? You're just pointing out he's arguing the wrong way. You're not stating how it should be argued, right? If you should make this kind of argument, you should say, well, this is the way you should argue, right? You're not doing that. You're very making sure that you're only pointing out how bad he is and not telling people how it actually should be done, right? Because then somebody might attack you for not doing it the right way. So by staying in telling other people how bad this guy is, you're implicitly grooming them to understand that you must be good, right? It's the old problem that somebody telling somebody else is immoral makes people think that that guy telling people that's immoral mean that he must be moral, right? But that's a fallacy, right? The same kind of fallacy.
For what do you mean by epistemology? And if they're basic problems, how is UPB deficient with reference?
No, but you should be very, very, very interested in getting that critique of your epistemology. If there is any critique, be open for critique, man. Let other people hear him criticize your epistemology, or epistemology in general, maybe, right? If there's a problem with, moral realism, if there's a problem with epistemology or basics of metaphysics and so on, this is the fucking core of philosophy, right? Let us hear what the guy has to say. Don't frame him like this. Let us hear his arguments, for Christ's sake, right? I want very badly to hear this guy talk about his argument. Let him try to establish the argument. You can point out if you think he's arguing an incorrect way or internally wrong or doesn't say anything or like that. When he actually gets to present his arguments, let the freaking guy get to present his argument, right? That would be in the behavior of any decent philosopher who talks about the art of the argument, right? I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. You're sitting here sort of not letting this guy get into argue by telling everybody else about how you should argue, right? Holy freaking crap.
To the book. And the reason you need to say with reference to the book is not because the book is some kind of Bible, but because you need to make sure that somebody actually understands UPB before they criticize it. Because, I mean, he says it's, they're epistemological.
Okay, so you need to understand before you criticize it. Okay, I would think that the author of the book might understand it, so he can receive some criticism of his book, right? The guy who wrote it, the person who wrote it, might be able to have an understanding of what is in the book, right? So when rationality rules comes and say, well, this syllogism you have here, it seems there's something, and then your response was something like, well, it's a million years since I wrote it. I can't remember all the arguments. It's dependent on this part of the book and another part, or actually the whole book, right? So then you're hand-waving a criticism away, and you're the fucking author of the book. I mean, why do anybody take you seriously? You're a fucking idiot, right? You're just spouting whatever you feel like in the moment and make people think that you are actually philosophizing, right? You're blemished on philosophy.
Metaphysical problems? No, not really. Doesn't really focus on epistemology. Certainly doesn't focus on metaphysics. right? When do I ever say that UPB is validated by real-world examples? I'd say that there's evidence for it, but not that it's validated by. So you say, I mean, it's not a pushback. It's just you need to find out if he's full of shit. And listen, most people are full of crap. Most people are completely full of crap. It's not their fault. It's not innate to human nature. But you understand, we're all raised to be ignorant and to feign knowledge. We're all raised to be ignorant and to feign knowledge, which are really the two sides of the same coin. So your default position, my default position when I go into any debate.
So if you are trained to feign knowledge, right, which is bad epistemology, then why are you basically rejecting epistemology and metaphysics in your approach to ethics, right? Because wouldn't your bad idea of knowledge influence how you get to like saying murder is wrong, right? Because that's that feigned knowledge that you're referring to. But you're just saying, well, I don't need to explain the murder is wrong. Everybody knows that, right? Then you're appealing to that same feigned knowledge that you are arguing against now, right? So, yeah, when you're talking here, and there was a book where you argued something 5 years ago, nobody can remember. Yeah, you can spout a lot of bullshit here that doesn't fit with something you said 5 years ago. But me being in this, circle of deconstructing your books within the last 6, 8, 9 months, right, means that I remember the arguments you made some time ago. It doesn't fit with what you're saying now, right? And it's just like it's one pile of bullshit after the other, right? You're arguing against your own arguments, so to say. You are invalidating or pulling down the validity or reducing the validity of your arguments, but because you're pointing out later that the way you argued back then is actually bad. You must be a similar kind of human beings as everybody else, and you're saying implicitly that you were feigned knowledge, right? And so how did you get rid of that knowledge, right? What's your philosophy? That's what you do. You clean up, like Socrates said, clean yourself, right? Get rid of that bullshit and start from fresh and build it from there. But in your book about ethics, you say, well, I don't need to prove that murder is wrong. Everybody knows that. It's like, oh, man, come on.
With anybody is they don't have a clue. They don't have a clue. And this is not just true of people who are my ideological opponents. Even most of my allies don't have a clue. Don't have a clue.
It might be that you might not have a clue, right? You're sort of this towering singularity of insight that is untouchable. And if there's some discrepancy, it must be because somebody else is wrong, right? Everybody else in the world is basically stupid except me, right? I mean, this reeks of megalomania, right?
Does Jordan Peterson understand that taxation is theft? A stateless society is the only morally just society? No.
Of course he does. But he doesn't say that. Everybody knows it deep down inside, right? They just don't want to admit it because they're afraid of being ostracized.
He wouldn't understand that.
And basically it's because he wanted not to get his so-called woman to leave him and say, well, if he says that taxation is theft, the woman is going to leave him, because every woman supports taxation, right? Because they benefit from it.
Do libertarians understand that spanking is the most prevalent and actionable violation of the non-aggression principle around? Most of them don't.
Well, people who are spanked their children are not, telling everybody else about it because they know it's not good parenting. They know that. No, you very, very rarely see parents hit their children in public spaces, right? I've seen it once. Somebody hitting a child, maybe twice. I know. It was slightly more prevalent when I was younger, right? But nobody does it publicly, right? Why? If it's so great to hit your children, why don't they just do it? No, because they know actually there is some inherently badness to it, right? Some kind of, it's not right, but they do it anyway, right?
So, yeah, most people are full of crap. And once they know that they're full of...
Could you point to somebody who has attempted debating with you who's not full of crap? Who's actually made a point where you can say, well, there was something wrong in my philosophy, there was something wrong in my ethics. Yeah, you could possibly find some little obscure thing somewhere, say, I was wrong about this little minuscule thing that doesn't hurt the bigger picture, right? Did anybody criticize you in any way during the last 15 years that actually made you say, wow, I hadn't thought of that? That is a great insight. I'm going to change my own philosophy radically. Or otherwise you believe that you're just perfect, right? That your belief is perfect. And if there's somebody thinking otherwise, there must be something wrong with them, right? Like the idealists, they're just crazy, right? Skeptics, I mean, how can you be skeptical, right? You might end up not believing in your senses, right?
Crap. They can begin to gain wisdom. You understand? This is not even my argument. This is Socrates 101. Most people are feigning knowledge. Most people are bullshitting. Most people are pretending. Most people are sophists. Now, this guy, in all of the stuff of his that I read, and I'm sorry to use him as an object example again. I'm sure he's a nice guy, smart guy, but needs to wake up to this stuff, right?
Well, why don't you get him on? Let him fucking explain his arguments, right? Other people might be enlightened by his argument, right? Why don't you let him argue for once instead of framing what is going on? Using him, as I've pointed out several times now, you're using him to manipulate your audience, which is also one of your points in your art of the argument, that arguing is not the opponent, but the audience, right? You're basically saying you're a sophist, right? For you, it's important to manipulate the audience rather than sort of getting to understand the other argument, right? It's winning and manipulating your audience into thinking, wow, you're so great, right?
There was not one specific objection to UPB. It was just a bunch of verbiage designed to make him sound smart. UPB.
Yeah. Why don't you go and listen to my deconstruction of UPB, right? If you're so hungering for somebody to do a rigid kind of deconstruction and contrary argument, whatever it's called, right, against your arguments in your pathetic, I'm not trying to hyperbole or poisoning the well, but just be aware it's absolutely atrocious the way he argues, right? As I pointed out when he's saying, I don't have to prove that murder is wrong, right? No, it's a definition, but it's the wrongness you have to point to. That is ethics, right? Also maybe known as meta-ethics, but it's a part of ethics, you could say. But no. He doesn't have that kind of insight.
He sounds stupid so that you would abandon the position. The appeal to insecurity. What?
What do you mean by appeals? Are you appealing to, you're trying to gaslight the arguments so that people lose faith in their own arguments, which they have been wedded to for a long time, saying must be right because I've had it so long, something like that. And then you say, sowing some doubt, sowing some skepticism into people that they might lose faith in their preconceived ideas. Well, isn't that to some degree philosophy? It's like saying, well, try and wake up from your Plato's cave and get out and get some fresh air, right? It's like you're contradicting, in at least in some degree, you're contradicting the idea of why you do philosophy. It's actually to challenge your own thinking. But that might entail you listening to somebody else in order to figure out, hey, I actually need to think about that. And if that guy didn't say, well, have you thought about that? You might not have got that instant, or that you might not have ignited that thought that made you sort of doubt what you are thinking already, as not actually not being so cut in stone as you have always gone around thinking. So you might, by your own accord, get to some decent philosophy. I consider myself an example of that, right? But I have certainly listened to a lot of philosophers and all kinds of arguments everywhere from east to west and so on, right? In order to inflict them on myself, to ignite myself to think, well, is there something here that I haven't thought about yet, right? And this is actually the core of philosophizing is you have to have your own philosophy to compare other people's philosophy with if you're going to listen to somebody else. If you're sitting alone in a cave trying to figure out everything, I don't think you will get there, right? You have to, it's to some extent a collective kind of endeavor, right? When somebody else presents an argument to you and you reflect about it, you might actually end up revising your own philosophy because you figure out I'm actually wrong where I was before, right? So take the question about idealism versus materialism, right? Or physicalism. I believe that Stefan Molyneux is a very strong and almost militant proponent of physicalism, right? It seems that way, at least from his argumentation, right? But it runs into some the major problems like the zombie problem and the hard problem of consciousness, as they have become known as, right? And I have a hard time figuring out if he even understands these problems, right? Or he just hand waving them away and saying, well, I don't need to look at that because I know I'm right. But then he's not a good philosopher, right? When does he actually do some philosophy? Is that when he writes a book, then some stream of consciousness? Or is he just pouring whatever he has in his head, this feigned knowledge, onto paper and saying, I'm great, therefore it's right. It's correct because I'm great. I don't know, and I don't really care, but I want people to understand that this guy is not going to be remembered in 500 years. That's for sure, right?
You need properly basic beliefs. Do you not have properly basic beliefs? Yeah, I do. Well, properly basic beliefs tells you that UPB is invalid. Okay. PPB. Greater than UPB. I think that was the original of the Jackson 5 song. Help him. Help him to understand. Look, everybody's got to go through that moment where they realize they're full of shit. And not that it's nature's not natural to them, it's just the way we're raised. I mean...
Well, somebody who's full of shit might not have an insight about epistemology or the terms of understanding of epistemology, understanding moral realism and so on. This is a person who has actually done some research of some kind, and it doesn't sound like the research has been done in your corner of the world, right? Because you're never talking about moral realism. You're talking about epistemology because that's hard to get around, right? But there's no other terms. But moral realism, you never talk about moral realism. So he's done some research elsewhere, right? So he's not completely stupid. He's actually tried. He must have tried to do something. He might have ended up in the wrong corner. Okay, so be it. But isn't it teaching everybody else how to do philosophy? By saying, well, I think it's something along these lines, right? But be open for suggestions from other people saying, well, I think it's this way. I say, okay, yeah, I see where you're going, but what about that? And what about this? What about that? And so on, right? And it might be a third solution that is optimal, right?
I had been a philosopher I had been really interested in philosophy and read a huge amount about philosophy and came up with some somewhat original ideas about philosophy. I mean, some of the stuff in the Rationalist Manifesto. You can get it at freedomain.nft.com, by the way. Pretty original.
Oh, it's pretty original. Oh, yeah. So your subjective standards for whether or not what you're doing is good or not is sort of an objective standard or what? Why are you saying it's good? It's pretty good. It's really good or something like that. So you're just trying to be a snake oil salesman, right? Saying, well, yeah, they have to be objective over there, but when I say what I have done is good, it must be good, right? You little peon, you should understand that I'm great, right? Oh, yes.
And then, 16 years ago, I was 39. So I did philosophy from 15. I did it for almost a quarter century. I did philosophy for almost a quarter century. And do you know what I said to myself? I don't know what virtue is.
You don't know what virtue is. I don't know what virtue is. That's what you said to yourself after 25 years of philosophy. I don't know what virtue is. Oh, come on, you're pulling some fairy tale story about your own significance, right? This is sort of nobody can check whatever you thought, right, or whatever you did, and this person was good and this person was bad, and they said this and they said that. We only have your subjective experience to hang on to, right? So don't encumber us with your subjective stories. If subjectivity is so bad, why are you always talking about your own experiences, right? Who gives a crap about your stupid subjective experiences? Give us some fucking objectivity that we can handle, right?
I don't know. I thought, I followed this person, I followed that person, I accepted these arguments, I accepted those arguments, but I could always find holes in them. So I studied something for 25 years, both privately, in my social life, and...
Yeah, while you try to become an actor, right? Of all things a philosopher could do, acting is not nearly at the top of the list, right? A philosopher trying to become an actor. Come on, man. How many actors do you know who also have a side show with philosophy, right? In just anything close to philosophy, actors are hollow, stupid people, right? Mostly, like Hitchcock says, they should be treated like cattle, right? They should be treated like cattle. Go over there, do this, do that, so on, right? He didn't say they are cattle. He also pointed that out himself. But they should be treated like cattle because they are people who want to be told what to do. Say this, do it this way, do it that way, sort of. Okay, you can say they're method acting and so on. But they're people who are being told what to do. And you say, no, I was thinking about philosophy, for 25 years, and I was gold panning, and I was, I was an actor, and I was a presenter I was doing philosophy, right? It's just a story you're telling to glorify your own path towards saving the world, right? Oh.
In academia, at the graduate school level, undergraduate and graduate school level.
Basically, who cares what you did? Who cares what you did? I don't give a crap if you were sort of bicycling 4 times around the earth or, a trip to the moon or whatever. Give me some fucking philosophy, right? Your subjective experiences don't give a flying fuck about. Give me something I can hang on to, which is objective and all that good stuff you're constantly railing about people should be focusing on. Then why are you fucking always talking about your own pathetic little loser experience, right? That doesn't count for anything according to your own standards, right?
And after 25 years, I said to myself, ooh, I don't actually know what virtue is. I don't know why violence is wrong. I don't know why theft...
What is that? He's starting to whisper. What's the kind of technique is that, right? It's like, hey, we are being very private here. Oh, hey, listen to me. Hey, I have a secret. Oh. What kind of manipulation is that?
It is wrong. It hurts people. Well, it's not an argument. I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt the person who's stealing. Right? So...
What is he doing now? So it has turned into hey, listen to what I was doing 15 years ago because it's so interesting. When he's talking about UPB, right? What's the difference between ethics? UPB is a framework for ethics, but he's talking about virtue. What's the difference between morality, ethics, and virtue, right? How do you delineate these words? Is it the same thing? If it's the same, why don't you use ethics? Because it's a framework for ethics, UPB. So use the term ethics. And if there's a difference between ethics and virtue, explain the difference, right?
I've gone through that passage, and it's like the deconstruction of your entire personality, because when you're forged in the fires of bullshit, washing away the bullshit feels like you're washing away your entire personhood. Like, what is it that is me that isn't a lie, that isn't bullshit, that isn't crap?
Well, you're not going to fight it in an acting school, are you? Right? And if you're saying, well, it was only in 2004 when my wife told me you could actually be an anarchist or something like that, oh yes, I figured out this is where I have to go. Like, but then you haven't been philosophizing very well the last 25 years, have you, right? If you started when you're 15 and, 24 years later when you're 39, none of that philosophy is useful, right? So why are you talking about it, right? Why are you using that as, well, yeah, if you add the 25 to the 14 years I've done now, you are reaching the 40 years of philosophy. So I must be right, right?
It's a big question. You ever use a high pressure hose to clean crap off something? And then that something also falls apart? It's so weakened that the high pressure hose just causes it to buckle and collapse. You ever try and clean something off your car and scratch the paint? Of course, right? I'm trying to remove that which is extraneous. And then, you keep looking inward, and you're like, okay, what is there in me that isn't a lie, that isn't a pretense? What is there in me that is true? Because we base our personalities, our beliefs, on what we perceive to be true. We're lied about what truth is. We're lied about what virtue is. We're lied to about these things. And so we say, okay, I'm going to take the high-pressure hose of philosophy. I'm going to remove all the crap. I got this painting. It's covered in mud. I'm just going to clean off the mud. Clean off the mud. And the paint starts to run. You start wiping that up. You wind up with no painting. You keep wiping. The canvas dissolves, then the frame, then the wall, then the house. And you're like, I shouldn't have started this. I'm being undone, unraveled.
Oh,
like you picked that little thread up off the...
This is the colorful language he refers to when he talks about how sophists talk, right? This is colorful language, right? This is evocative. It's imaginative kind of language. Oh, the house that is blown apart. You envision things, and it sort of lures you, grooms you into listening to him. It's sort of a meditative. He's sort of pounding your brain until you sound like you're hypnotized listening to Stefan Molyneux. Like, oh shit, right? What was I listening to? I've been hypnotized by his language, right? He's almost like he has a hypnotic, effect on you sometimes, at least.
But you yank it up, half the carpet comes up. Oops, shouldn't have started this process. But it's necessary. It's why we have a modern world. You understand? It's why.
So, if you need to remove everything, that means you have to go back to metaphysics, isn't it? And figure out how to know things, because all this faint knowledge you have to get rid of, right? And then you have to establish some way to know things. Well, isn't that the foundations for how to arrive at ethics? And then you argue that ethics, no, it's just about a contradiction, right? Finding a contradiction, and then I proved ethics, right? So what is all this knowledge and metaphysics about? If the goal is basically a moral principle or some kind of morality judgment, but ethics and metaphysics are sort of the foundations of how to get there, right? You have to have a car to drive in a car, right? And you have to road to put the car on, right? If there's no road and there's no car, how do you get from A to B, right? You can't just say, I'm just going to drive anyway, right? Because it says a car can not be not a car, so there must be a car, right? So it's the kind of a, what? You need to have some foundations, and this is, of course, metaphysics and epistemology, right? To get to knowledge. Because you have to have knowledge to agree upon what the hell is going on in the world, which you are referring to when you are saying murder is wrong. There's some object dying or being made dead, right? And you're saying it has wrongness to it, right? That's a fucking epistemological claim, whether you like it or not. That's about knowledge, right? So you have to have epistemology, and epistemology is based on metaphysics. You can't arrive at a decent description of epistemology, and is my claim, without doing fucking rigid metaphysics. Otherwise, you're just going to fart in the wind, right? So I don't buy any of this bullshit.
Why we have all this technology. It's why we have still vibrant but somewhat diminished liberties that we possess. It's why we can have this conversation.
Conversation! Conversation! Who are you conversing with? You're talking to yourself, right? Maybe there's someone who can write some... I want to ask a little question to Mr. High-Flying Philosopher Stefan Molyneux. Can you answer this question? Or something like that. That's not a conversation, is it? And calling this a conversation where you take somebody else's arbitrary statement from some forum somewhere and presenting it as an argument, is calling that a conversation, is an insult to the idea of conversation. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on with this guy. He's fucking crazy, right?
People said to themselves, maybe we don't really know how to communicate technologically. Maybe the Pony Express isn't the way to go. Oh, look, we got the telegraph. Oh, look, we got the telephone. Oh, look, we got the radio. Oh, look, we've got the internet. Help people out. Ask them for definitions with reference to the original. And I know why you don't do that. And you know why you don't do that. Maybe not consciously, but you know deep down. You know that if someone comes along like this, throwing their bullshit weight around, trying to discredit something without providing any details, you start asking them for...
Okay, let's talk about definitions, right? Definitions entails the idea of reductionism. That means that by defining something, you have to be able to reduce that to some substructure of some kind by which you can define it. And that substructure might also be composed of another substructure beneath that, which is also defined, and so on. Way down until you get to the reduction base, which is the foundations of your philosophy. That's where the foundation of metaphysics is. Physics can't be a reduction base because that's based on implicit understandings of that's an elephant and that's a clock and that's a cloud and so on. But how do you get to that insight? Well, that's metaphysics, right? So you have to get to the metaphysical reduction base. You can't just throw around definitions without having that reduction base, because then you're just farting in the wind. So that's why you need to go to the foundations in order to get to the foundation of your reduction base before you can build up to get to definition based on that reduction base, right? Otherwise, if you're just halfway to knowledge during epistemology, you can't just conjure up some definition without having an understanding what these terms used for that definition means, which is another reduction based on another reduction based on another reduction until you reach that base, right?
Details on what happens. They escalate. They escalate. Because you're pushing them when you say, oh, okay, so it's got basic, what you said, basic metaphysical problems. Okay. Can you define metaphysics and give me an example from the book of these basic metaphysical...
No, maybe it's a lack. Maybe there's something lacking, and he's saying, well, there's something lacking in metaphysics. Well, there's nothing to refer to if it's lacking. If you're not using I'm not saying it necessarily is the case, but there's not very much metaphysics, as far as I remember, in UPB, right? So it may be some other book. Okay, fair enough, but it might be the lack of rigid philosophy that he's actually referring to. So you can't point to the book and say there's something missing there. Yeah, he could do maybe, right? But that's not what you're asking for. You're asking for me to point, or him to point at the book and say there, right? But most of what is the problem with your philosophy is what you don't philosophize about, or the way you philosophize about things that are highly lacking in rigidity and coherence, right? And it feels disconnected and cherry-picked, like, oh, no, I'm talking about this, oh, no, I'm talking about that. You're grabbing out of the air. And always those you are cherry-picking are those where you can turn it over to become some kind of political ideology of some kind, right? And it's just bullshit, right?
Problems, right? As if there's anything about metaphysics that's basic. It's like, well, basic quantum physics problems. Like, I don't think there's much that's basic about quantum physics or whatever, right? Basic vector calculus problems. So you ask them, right? You say, can you give a brother a definition and an example? Because if you tell someone that they're wrong in a public forum and you don't provide any example.
A public forum? I need to go back and see if there's actually a link somewhere to this public. It's public in the sense that it's public to all the other acolytes that he has. I don't think he's on a completely public forum discussing this stuff. I might be wrong, but maybe I should look into that until we get to the next. I think I will stop it here. We are at 1 hour and 30, and we are sort of, let me see, we are 54 minutes into a very long discussion on UPB. So let me say that this is where we got to this time, and I will see you soon in possibly a part 4 in the future. So hang on tight. See you then.